Welcome. If you're looking to really get your head around some complex ideas quickly and thoroughly, you're in the right place.
Absolutely. Today we're digging into a recent Q&A session Jordan Peterson gave at the Oxford Union.
Yeah, and it wasn't just one topic. They covered, well, everything from political life, compassion, the whole wokeism debate, even transgender issues. It was pretty wide-ranging.
It really was. And because it's a Q&A, you get that raw, sort of unscripted feel, direct engagement with audience questions.
Exactly. So our mission here is to pull out the most significant bits, the core ideas, and give you some clarity and context.
And we'll aim to present the different viewpoints that came up impartially, just laying out what was discussed.
Okay, let's dive in. It kicked off with a really fundamental question, didn't it, about whether pursuing politics is, well, still a noble thing to do.
It did. And Peterson's response, especially aimed at younger people maybe feeling cynical, was quite blunt.
Yeah, he basically challenged their right to be cynical so early on. Like, what the hell do you know, was the gist.
hmm He argued you need some life experience, grappled with things before you can justify that level of um, dismissal of the whole system.
He laid out this kind of rule almost.
Yeah.
If good people refuse to shoulder civic responsibility,
Then the tyrants take over. That was the stark warning.
it's a powerful idea. It links personal inaction directly to, well, potentially terrible outcomes.
It does, and it tackles that common feeling maybe of being too moral for politics.
Right. Someone brought that up. But his comeback was essentially, what's the alternative? Just leave to the corrupt.
Precisely. It becomes almost a duty then for decent people to get involved, even knowing it's messy.
Which leads to that problem, why do so many competent, maybe ethical people avoid politics?
That's a huge dilemma. The personal cost, the scrutiny, the potential compromises, it puts people off.
And the consequence is, well, maybe not having the best people in those crucial roles.
Exactly. He also talked about the path from naivety to cynicism. He saw cynicism not as the endpoint, surprisingly.
Yeah, he framed it as almost a necessary step. Like, okay, you see the flaws now, you're not naive anymore. That's progress, sort of.
But the danger is getting stuck there in the cynicism.
Right, the goal is to move through it, to understand the problems, but still choose to engage responsibly.
To choose optimism, even. He mentioned a moral obligation to try and promote a positive view despite knowing about the corruption.
That's a tough balancing act. Seeing the bad, but still pushing for the good.
It is. And his practical advice for anyone going into that arena.
Ah, yes, grow a thick hide.
You have to learn to withstand the pressures, the attacks, the temptations of power that come with it. Resilience is key.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. An audience member brought up this term, toxic compassion, something Peterson's been talking about recently.
Yes. And his explanation started right back at, well, human biology, how long human babies are dependent.
Exceptionally long compared to other animals.
Yeah.
Which requires immense compassion, right?
Exactly. But that compassion, which is vital initially, needs to adapt. It needs discernment as the child grows.
He used the mother-child relationship as the prime example. That absolute compassion for an infant has to pull back, eventually, to allow for autonomy.
And he acknowledged how hard that can be for parents. Letting go. It can even get tangled up with their own identity, he suggested.
Yeah, like if being the primary caregiver is so central to who you are, encouraging separation feels threatening, maybe?
Potentially. And this is where he brought in, interestingly, the traditional role of marriage, or at least the stereotypical dynamic.
The stereotype being women protect, men encourage separation. He did flag it as a stereotype.
Yes. But the idea was that having those two sometimes opposing tendencies within the family unit helps mediate that difficult transition for the child.
It provides a kind of balance, like figuring out when to discipline versus when to console. That requires judgment.
Definitely. And he stressed you shouldn't try to figure that out alone. You need input, maybe even a benevolent opponent, as he put it, someone to challenge your perspective.
That applies beyond parenting too, right?
Yeah.
In any relationship where you're balancing support and pushing someone.
Absolutely. Then he circled back to the mother's role, specifically the importance of her maintaining her own life, her own identity, separate from the child.
Why was that so important?
His argument was that if the mother has a full life of her own, she's less likely to kind of cling to the maternal role too long, potentially infantilizing the child.
Ah, I see. And it also provides a model for the child.
Exactly. It models competent adulthood. It shows them what they're aiming for.
Okay, now on to a really charged topic. Speaking truth, particularly in what the questioner called a woke environment. Someone at Oxford felt they couldn't critique wokeism without risking their career.
Hmm. And Peterson's starting point was his definition of faith, which isn't maybe the conventional one.
What was it again?
He defined faith as the willingness to assume that telling the truth will lead to the best possible outcome in the long run, even if it costs you something now.
Wow, that's a high bar.
It is. He then talked about why people don't tell the truth or stay silent. Two main reasons.
Which were?
One, to get something you don't deserve, an advantage. Two, to escape a punishment you do deserve.
So short-term gain, basically.
Right. But he questioned if it's really a gain long term. His advice was essentially align yourself with truth, even with the potential costs.
Why? What's the benefit?
Because then you have reality on your side. And if you have to lie to get or keep something a job, a relationship, is it really the right place for you anyway?
That's a challenging thought. He used an analogy, didn't he, about academics?
Yes, the professor who stays silent maybe bites their tongue at every stage, PhD, junior faculty, tenure out of fear.
And ends up tenured, but having never really spoken their mind. A tenured coward, I think he said.
Exactly. And his point was that courage doesn't just magically appear when you feel secure. You have to practice it now.
He even gave examples like J. Padatre of the Great Barrington Declaration. Faced huge backlash, but Peterson argued he's now thriving.
Right. Suggesting that sticking to your guns, telling the truth as you see it, can sometimes lead to better places eventually, even after initial hardship.
He also told that story about his own grad school application.
Yeah. Writing something very honest, potentially off-putting, but it led into the right supervisor.
It fits the theme. Authenticity attracts the right things.
And he wrapped that section up with a really stark statement. If your life is built on lies, it's not really your life.
Belongs to the lie. Yeah, powerful stuff.
Okay, next up was a question from a theology student about cultural Christianity.
Right, people who follow the traditions, the ethics, maybe, but without that deep personal belief. What's the value in that?
And Peterson's first answer was super brief and interesting.
What did he say? Just, I don't know.
Pretty much, I don't know, and I believe in you, I believe you can do it.
Huh. So, acknowledging the difficulty, but putting faith in the questioner.
Yeah. But then he did elaborate later. He reflected that aiming upward, even imperfectly, is valuable.
Like, trying to engage with those ideas, even for just an hour a week, is better than nothing.
Exactly. He argued that, in a way, all Christians are cultural Christians to some degree, because fully living out the ideals is impossible. It's an aspiration.
So doing a good thing badly is better than not doing it at all.
That was precisely his point. He used a gym analogy. You don't start by lifting massive weights. You start small. Doing something is better than staying on the couch.
So don't be too cynical about people's first, maybe fumbling steps towards faith or virtue.
Right. He cautioned against that kind of cynicism, even if someone is partly doing it for social camouflage, as he put it.
You just fitting in.
Yeah. He argued that even that shows some care about what others think, which is a basic social good.
Interesting take. So acknowledge the depth required for true conviction, but don't dismiss the value of starting, however imperfectly.
That seemed to be the core message. You have to start somewhere.
Okay, now we need to address a very intense exchange that happened. An audience member challenged Peterson on past comments about transgender issues.
Yes, this was definitely the most heated part of the Q&A. The questioner specifically mentioned comments on the Joe Rogan podcast,
Accusing him of calling being transgender a sociological contagion and comparing trans people to Satanists.
Right. And Peterson's denial on the Satanist comparison was immediate and very strong. He said, no, I don't think so. Unequivocally denying that specific comparison.
Okay, important clarification. But the questioner persisted, talking about intense anti-trans comments and citing high suicide rates among trans youth in the U.S.
Linking Peterson's alleged comments to creating a hostile environment contributing to those rates.
And Peterson's reaction.
Equally strong. He accused the questioner of falsehood, saying they had no idea what you're talking about. He rejected the causal link they were suggesting between his views and suicide rates.
So a direct clash of perspectives there. Did he address the sociological contagion part?
He did. He reiterated that view, but clarified he was referring specifically to the rapid rise in identification, particularly among adolescent girls. He drew parallels to things like eating disorders or historical outbreaks of hysteria, suggesting social factors play a significant role in those kinds of rapid increases in specific demographics.
I see. So framing it as a pattern of social influence rather than an inherent characteristic being newly discovered at that rate.
That seemed to be his argument, yeah, focusing on the pattern of increase in a specific group.
But the questioner pushed back on that too, didn't they?
They did. They accused him of using concern for women as a cover for perpetuating hate towards a minority group.
So interpreting his concern about that demographic trend very differently.
Exactly, a complete difference in interpretation of motive and meaning.
And how did Peterson wrap up that exchange?
He essentially dismissed the initial premise, the Satanism comparison, as having no substance, calling the line of questioning a form of moralizing Phariseeism aimed at damaging his reputation or reputation savaging him.
Wow. Okay. So a very contentious moment with starkly opposing views laid bare.
Definitely. No resolution there, just a clear disagreement.
All right, moving on. The conversation then turned to freedom of speech. Specifically, the difference, if any, between free speech for an ordinary individual versus someone like a head of state or major influencer.
Peterson approached this from a, well, almost metaphysical standpoint initially.
How so?
He argued that fundamentally there's no difference in the inherent value of any individual's speech or their relationship to truth.
Regardless of their position.
Regardless, he tied it to the foundational idea in free societies that every single person reflects the image of God or has that inherent sovereign value.
So everyone's pursuit of truth matters equally. He used an Old Testament example, right?
Yes, the widow versus Queen Jezebel, showing how someone seemingly powerless can embody truth against corrupt power. Each person's honest speech has a world-redeeming quality, as he put it.
Okay, so equal value in principle, but
Yeah.
there was a but, wasn't there?
There was a big one. He added the caveat that people in positions of significant social responsibility, CEOs, political leaders, etc., do have an additional burden.
Which is?
They have to bind their impulsive speech. They need to recognize their role and the weight their words carry. They can't just, spout off like a private citizen might without consequence.
So the head of state example, they need to govern their tongue carefully because their words have massive ripple effects.
Exactly. More responsibility comes with more influence. The underlying value of their truthful insight might be the same, but the obligation for prudence in expressing it is higher.
That makes sense. Okay, nearly there. The final audience question tackled universities, the increasing public scrutiny, declining trust, often linked to this idea of wokeism.
Right, and Peterson's advice was, again, maybe a bit counterintuitive.
Don't try to manage public opinion.
Essentially, yes. He argued universities should not navigate based on public perception. They should conduct themselves according to their conscience, focus on their core mission, the pursuit of truth, and let the consequences, including public trust, follow from that.
He looked back at Harvard in the 90s as a kind of positive model.
He did, describing it as a place with high-quality students, ambitious junior faculty, knowledgeable senior professors, and an administration that served that core truth-seeking mission. And because it was doing its job well, it earned public trust.
But he wasn't optimistic about universities getting back to that, was he?
Not really. He expressed a pretty pessimistic view, actually, citing the dominance of university administrations, which he sees as influenced by a progressive mob, and the largely left-leaning tenured faculty as major obstacles.
So the bureaucracy and ideology are getting in the way of the core mission, in his view.
That's the concern he raised. He did suggest Oxford and Cambridge might have a slightly better chance, maybe because of their more independent college structures.
Interesting. But the main point remained. Fix the mission. Don't try to manipulate the PR.
Exactly. Return to being genuine truth-seeking enterprises, and trust will hopefully follow.
And then the very last question was personal. What's the biggest thing he's been wrong about?
And his answer was incredibly short.
Yeah. What was it?
He just said, "What do you think I was a socialist when I was 14?
Ah, okay. A concise acknowledgement of youthful ideology, perhaps?
Seems like it. A brief moment of self-deprecation, maybe.
Well, that really was a deep dive, wasn't it? We've gone through political duty, compassion's complexity, speaking truth, cultural faith, that intense transgender debate, free speech nuances, university trust. A lot of ground covered.
It really was a rich Q&A, and hopefully listeners feel they've got a clearer picture of the key arguments and exchanges, the points of tension and agreement.
Absolutely. Some powerful themes running through it. Responsibility, courage, the difficulty of navigating complex social issues, the search for truth.
Definitely. What stands out will vary for everyone, but those threads were certainly there.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. As you navigate your own world, How do you balance conviction with social pressure? Where do you find the courage to speak honestly? And how do you decide when and how? And what do you think institutions like universities need to do to genuinely foster understanding and earn trust? Big questions. But hopefully exploring these ideas from the Oxford Union session gives some valuable food for thought. Indeed. Keep thinking, keep questioning. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.